Cold War Zombies might possibly be the best example of a Call of Duty Zombies game that both completely failed yet succeeded astronomically at the same time. Everything from the development of the game during a worldwide pandemic to the handling of some of its post-launch content is far more interesting and complicated than first meets the eye. Not only am I going to analyze the finer details of the gameplay, maps, and mechanics, but I'm also going to talk about where this game fits in the current landscape of gaming in general. This will be a full examination of Black Ops Cold War Zombies and why this happens to be one of the most important installments in the franchise. Call of Duty Zombies released in 2008, it was a significantly different era of time than current day. World at War Zombies was essentially just made from a passion project using the table scraps of World at War's assets and engine. It was just a fun idea some developers had in mind to showcase some clever creativity. Fast forward to current day, the era of mainstream gaming appeal, embarrassing Fortnite events, celebrities being associated with the sphere, and the idea of the gamer now being considered a cool thing or somewhat of an attractive trait and so on. Call of Duty Zombies almost feels like a relic of the past in some ways. However, Zombies has lasted this long as a result of changing and adapting itself to fit the current gaming landscape, and I would argue Cold War Zombies is one of the best installments at doing so in the history of the series. I'm not saying it doesn't have its flaws, which believe me, I'm going to take apart in painful detail, but let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's important to understand Cold War Zombies was primarily created and developed during a worldwide pandemic, and no, I'm not talking about the pandemic of kids flossing at school because they saw Tyler Blevins doing it before. I'm talking about the exquisite Mexican beer. Clearly, the world situation had a severe impact on how a game gets developed, and you have to have some sympathy for developers who may or may not be new to the industry being thrust into this new way of doing things. Many people saw their work shift to be done virtually, which maybe for a game dev isn't too different from what they're typically used to, but it surely threw a wrench in their process, at least to some extent. And you also need to understand the position Treyarch found themselves in when creating this game. After the conclusion of the decade-long Ether universe story and the utter failure of the Chaos story in Black Ops 4, Treyarch and Activision probably found themselves in an awkward position in which they were probably asking themselves, well, where do we go from here? Now, in my opinion, this could have gone one of three ways. Number one, they could have dug up and defiled the graves of the Ether storyline and characters to try to bank on nostalgia and fan service as much as possible to try to milk their already existing audience. They could have gone the completely shameless route and sold out their integrity and creativity as a studio in an attempt to be crowd pleasers. Number two, they could have tried a completely brand new storyline with a universe and characters entirely unrelated to the Ether universe. Oh, they already tried that. Number three, they attempt to write a new thread of a story while staying in the same universe, at least, that the old fans of the series cared about. In my eyes, all of these strategies have their inherent flaws. You're screwed no matter which option you pick, really, and in this case, it seems like Treyarch went for option number three. It was probably the right move in response to the reception of the previous game, and in many ways, which I'll explain. As opposed to something like Black Ops 4, I think it's fair to say Cold War Zombies' flaws come more in the form of missed opportunities rather than actual systems going wrong. Before the game came out, people were hungry for and craving somewhat of a return to the grassroots feel of Call of Duty Zombies, a step back from the more fantastical elements brought on by BO3 and BO4, and in large part, Cold War tried to do just that. Having the first map set in a realistic facility, and of course, part of Nocturne Toten being implemented tastefully into the map, it was a nice change of pace when everything in the previous Ether storyline since Gorod Krovi was some kind of hard or soft remake. It's also important to understand the original backbones of the game and early Cold War maps, specifically Maschine, were actually a project primarily developed by Sledgehammer, and Treyarch was pulled off of Black Ops 4 to work on Cold War and to sort of Treyarchify the game. This is pretty obvious to tell Sledgehammer's influence, especially when playing the on-disc map, even in the menus, the general systems of creating your class, the way the map initially guides you through the process of opening up the space and turning on the power, and even the tone of the game at this point feels very similar to the World War II game in 2017. It's still unclear what Sledgehammer's original idea for this game looked like before Treyarch came to help, but I'm going to bet that the game was made significantly better as a result. Another important factor in the development of this game is the fact that there was a lot of new blood at Treyarch this year. Many of the staff that made the titles in years past have since left the studio. Fresh ideas can be scary, but they can also provide the necessary creativity to revitalize something struggling. Cold War in general feels like a direct response to the criticisms of Black Ops 4 and even some of the games before it. Now, what were those responses, you might ask? First and foremost, the general structure of the gameplay. Black Ops 3 and 4 were starting to become a little bit too complicated for the average player, and not in a good way either. To even interact with the maps on the most basic level, utilize the features like buildables, pack-a-punch, side quests, and of course the main Easter egg, you had to have a YouTube tutorial up for most things in the map. These games double down on the idea of many parts to gather, multiple spawn locations for things. I'm looking at you, Blood of the Dead, and your 42 spawn locations. For the most part, this made the most enjoyable elements of the game virtually inaccessible for the average player, and as much as I understand my position in saying it, it was a game made for Reddit users and YouTubers. You had to have had a previously vested interest in zombies to really get into this game, and it was the highest barrier to entry I've seen in a zombies game possibly ever. When the average Easter egg guide for a given map was anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, the game starts to feel more like homework than a video game, and in most BO4 maps, and a few in BO3, you almost always needed external tools like solvers or location guides for these maps. This is what we like to refer to in the business as artificial difficulty. Get used to this term. This is the idea that you can stretch out the time a player spends doing a task without actually adding anything substantively harder that stretches your skill or ability as a player. Rather, it can boil down to possibly a memory test and or how many guides you might have access to at that time. Artificial difficulty presents itself in every map to some degree, but some are worse offenders than others. Here are a few examples. Dead of the Night, 1.8 million items and 67,000 spawn locations for each. Revelations, Random Rock Step, and Stone Step. Blood of the Dead Bird. Blood of the Dead Morse Code. Moon Excavator Pi. Transit Jet Gun Parts. 9 Skull Locations. Alpha Omega Rushmore Codes. Zetsubo no Shima Bullet Plan. Everything in Togder Toten. Need I continue? You get the point I'm trying to make. There are tons of examples, but to illustrate the point with a silly metaphor, I tell you to find and open an Easter egg in my yard. The task is fairly simple and straightforward, but if my name happens to be P. Diddy and my house is larger than most towns, getting to the task itself will be much more annoying for no real reason. You'll get the same effect really if my yard was 75% smaller. It's simply in place to give the illusion that the task is more difficult than it really is. You just spend more time covering ground that has no ultimate meaning or purpose. Cold War Zombies completely backtracks on almost all of this artificial difficulty. For most things, the accessibility and most mechanics can be utilized with virtually no external help, and the things you do need can be found reliably in the same place every time. However, the task to obtain said items can range from being very easy to a bit more difficult. This is a welcome change in my opinion. It's refreshing to not have the pace of gameplay be interrupted by having to pull up a YouTube tutorial while one of your friends runs around with a zombie for a circle in 10 minutes while Mr. Rothwaffles tells you where the thing you need for the wonder weapon is. Now that said, it does come with its own downside, which we'll get into, and that happens to be in the main Easter egg. First, and arguably the most important part of a map, the main quest. Now, Easter egg is a term used loosely in modern times. When the first mini Easter eggs were introduced in World at War and Black Ops 1, they were truly Easter eggs. Secrets hidden by developers that can enhance the way you experience a map and reward you for being curious, but is by no means the main course or appeal when playing that content. A great example is Ascension in Black Ops 1. The map stood on its own 2 feet at the time as just being a fun zombies map in a location which had previously never been done before. You had the option to discover a deeper narrative on your own by doing fairly well thought out and creative steps. As time went on, the term Easter egg got thrown around a lot more liberally to a point where in modern day zombies, this refers to the main quest of the map and where the most amount of crafted content is to be derived from. When it comes to designing an Easter egg in zombies, you basically have 2 options. You create a series of arbitrary puzzles and steps that are sometimes seemingly illogical in nature, but fun to discover and hunt for the first time around. Maps with actual puzzles that require you to know exactly how they work and interact with them in the correct way to progress. There was great thrill in the nights a new map would release and teams would be racing each other to solve all the puzzles and have the pride of completing the map first in the world. You'd have the entire community stuck on one puzzle for possibly days at a time, creating a bit of a friendly cooperation and competition. However, while this is the positive element of this Easter egg style, it does come with a few downsides. When you design a main quest where the steps are built on artificial difficulty and or multiple spawn locations for everything you need for no real reason, it only serves to drag out the time it takes to solve that Easter egg without actually making any of that time meaningful or substantial. The best designed puzzle steps are the ones that are difficult to initially solve, but easy to replicate in repeat playthroughs, and in most cases without the need for an external solver, but some can be just almost as painful and dull every time you do them. Once it's understood how most puzzle steps work in zombies, it's basically useless. You just pull up a guide or a solver to brainlessly plug in the right things, like in Gorod Krovi on the Valve step, or even the Origin stabs and the upgrade puzzles that come along with those. Black Ops 4 in particular leaned very heavily into this style. Remember this puzzle? Or this one? Or how about doing this one? I love doing Morse code in my video game where I shoot zombies. And of course, I'm not implying that reasonable puzzles can be a nice change of pace in the game and can actually be a good switch up from the potentially monotonous gameplay otherwise. I am saying, however, if you ever feel like you're doing homework while playing zombies in a video game, or you're watching tutorials that are nearly an hour long, it's probably an indicator that your game is fundamentally not designed as well as it could be. A great game does its puzzles in a show, don't tell manner. You can look at something and instantly start to detect patterns and begin to think up solutions on how to solve it. The game shouldn't have to outright tell you you have to figure this out. A good puzzle example I would like to point out is the Samantha Says on Moon. It's literally just 4 colors that randomize every single game, and you repeat the sequence and can be done without any prior knowledge of the map. Another great example is the Sharpshooter step on Buried. The other approach to making an Easter egg is to have a quest in which all of the resources you need to complete the quest will be available to the player for the most part without any artificial inflation of the difficulty. There's a big difference between doing a quest that's genuinely challenging, like Gorod Krovi, and specifically the gameplay challenges that come along with it, and just doing a collectathon or scavenger hunt. Even as much as I like Origins, the map suffers from that problem too. Most of the Easter egg is just a collecting marathon to build the stabs, and apart from that process, there's like 2 other real steps that can be done in about 30 seconds. And while Origins was fundamentally built with 4 players in mind, the concept still stands. And it's totally possible that's more your style of game, and more power to you. I just don't think that personally works super well in COD Zombies, but I digress. I can honestly say Cold War Zombies has done a stellar job at actually being fun when it comes to playing most of the steps in the main quest. Now, we will take this apart in more detail soon, but suffice to say, Cold War's Easter eggs have a formula that works. The downside to this formula, however, is the fact that the initial excitement of the hunt for these new maps were over in a matter of hours. Sometimes when previous maps used to take us 2 weeks due to the nature of the quest and its intentional arbitrary design, most Cold War maps were solved in about 2 hours. The price you pay for a fun to repeat and replay Easter eggs is somewhat of a lackluster hunt. Some of the greatest zombies maps in history struck this balance just right. Der Eisendrache, for example, took a few days to solve, but now is regarded as one of the most straightforward Easter eggs to do in all of zombies history, without really any annoying steps to speak of. Shadows of Evil is also a decent example, fairly straightforward quest now, but took a whole week and some data mining to solve it. Cold War Zombies perhaps leaned a little bit too far in the other direction Easter egg wise. They were extremely gameplay based and well designed at that, but lacked many of the fun puzzles that worked so well in other Zombies maps. This is made most apparent by the HUD. All of the items you need are labeled in Cold War, whereas in other games, many of the collectible items never appeared in your HUD at all, and there was no indicator they were actually for the main quest. Now, I'll dissect the Easter eggs in greater detail here soon, but another response to the community criticism was the change from the specialist weapon to the field upgrades, and in my opinion is just objectively a better system compared to specialist weapons from past games. Let me explain why. The special system in BO3 and BO4 was, at its core, just another way to kill zombies. Remove the quest in order to obtain some of them in BO3, and you're left with virtually the same thing as a wonder weapon. In BO4, basically all of the weapons accomplish the same thing with very few other properties. They blow up zombies, and that is to say, in many ways, it didn't matter if you were running the death machine or the flamethrower. At the end of the day, they accomplished the exact same thing. In Cold War, they expanded on the idea from World War II zombies in a way which actually feels like an extension of the perk system rather than having a wonder weapon. You have field upgrades with clear strengths and trade-offs. For example, Ring of Fire greatly increases your killing power, but requires you to be stationary the whole time. Healing Aura allows you to keep your teammates alive and is crucial for support, but lacks a real offensive capability. Frenzied Guard allows you to play very safe and defensively in more of a lone wolf playstyle, but also lacks a real offense as well. This can be said about each of the field upgrades. They all add a meaningful different way to approach the game. Same thing with how Pack-a-Punch works as well. In BO4, you had to upgrade 4 separate times to have max damage. On paper, I was fine with this. However, in the game, the cost for Pack-a-Punch was always the same, and there was really no way to tell a single pack-a-punched gun from a quadruple papped one. They weren't visually different, and subjectively, it was kind of hard to tell the difference in damage just by shooting them. Cold War Zombies changes this very intelligently by having a 3-tier system, each one costing significantly more than the last and having a distinctly different camo and damage output, with each upgrade along with an icon to represent what tier it is otherwise. Ammo mods also return, but aren't put up to random chance like in Black Ops 3 and 4, but instead can be selected right away according to your preference. This allows the player to continue to feel like they are still meaningfully progressing their loadouts even later into the game. Same idea with the armory and the tiers of armor and weapons. The salvage system is a separate currency that allows you to do things without the need to burn points. The zombies also increase in both health and speed as the rounds go on, but even hit power as you get into the higher rounds, so you don't become so powerful that the game becomes boring. However, with the right strategy, you can become basically invincible if you know what you're doing. Now, this is one of my biggest criticisms of Cold War Zombies, and that's the fact that there isn't enough threat. There's this idea that people have when discussing zombies and what makes it fun. An argument I hear a lot is, zombies is fun when you let the player feel powerful. And on face value, I never really thought twice about that, but after examining it a bit more, I don't actually believe that's true, or at least not totally. Zombies is the most fun when the player feels vulnerable or there is actually a real threat of failure. Think about it. Some of your most heart-pounding, adrenaline-inducing moments in zombies are when you clutch up without Juggernog, reviving your friend just before they die, or just barely escaping a horde, or finishing a boss fight with your last bullets. When you take the argument that the player wants to feel powerful to its logical conclusion, you'd have a situation where you have God mode on and a wonder weapon that never depletes ammo. And I don't have to tell any of you guys how quickly that would become boring. In Cold War Zombies, we have the crafting table, and you can make a variety of support and lethal items to assist you, one of those being self-revive. In past titles, in Solo, Quick Revive only gave you 4 lives. Each down would cause you the luxury of being able to afford another mistake. This is watered down in Cold War, in which self-revives are easy to craft and have no hard limit. The only thing that will limit it is scrap collection, and with the addition of the most recent perks to the game has become basically a non-problem now. You can potentially be on round 300 or more, but with 60 plus downs, and at that point, there's no real tension to the game at all. It's easy to recover, and you're not punished nearly as hard as you could be for mistakes. I think this is what people generally mean when they say the game is too easy. It's not that the mechanics itself are easy, but the game is too forgiving of mistakes. This could have been helped by setting a hard cap at how many self-revives can be crafted, and while this isn't a deal breaker for me, you have to admit that high rounds to some degree can be a lot less impressive if it's only a matter of time spent and not necessarily much skill to carry it there. Most of the lethal support streaks can also just be get out of jail free cards as well, and providing another layer of safety. Something that makes zombies gameplay interesting in my eyes are the layers of safety to their games. Let's take a look at a few for example. In World at War, you have virtually no safety nets. You get cornered, you die. In Black Ops 1, you also have no safety nets. You get cornered, you die. In Black Ops 2, you get cornered, for the most part you die, unless you have a shield. In Black Ops 3, you get cornered, you have Widow's Wine, you have a Specialist, you have a shield, and you have Gobblegum. In Black Ops 4, you have Winter's Wail, Specialist, Shield, Dying Wish, Victorious Tortoise, elixirs, wraithfire, etc. In Cold War, you have armor, field upgrade, Juggernog 1 HP upgrade, which is basically Dying Wish, which saves you, and streaks. My point is, more safety nets the player has for mistakes, the harder the game has to be in response. And this is fundamentally where Cold War failed for me. Very low barrier to entry on the game, which I liked, but could have gone way farther with the skill ceiling. Also, last thing to discuss before diving into maps. Progression is a generally used term in gaming, which signifies the player overcoming obstacles and becoming more and more powerful as a result, ideally coming to an endpoint. Now, this part is entirely personal taste, and I understand there's no empirical evidence to back up what I'm about to say, but specifically in zombies, I've never been a fan of what I'll call out-of-game progression. Meaning, you need to do things in the game to unlock things out of the game, and most of the time in the menus, unlock items or upgrade existing ones to help you be more powerful in-game. This is alright for me in single-player games in which that's literally the whole point, but I've always seen zombies best played as a mostly in-game progression style. In World at War to Black Ops 2, there were literally no external systems that you had to level up to perform well in the match itself. However, the progression was still there in the form of starting with a pistol, being very weak and vulnerable at first, to acquiring all of the best the game has to offer, wonder weapons, perks, etc. If you've got enough wit and skill as a player, obviously. Same idea with Battle Royale games. Everyone starts on the same playing field. Nobody has an advantage over one another as a result of how long they've played or items they've earned previously. What separates players is the skill involved in critical thinking, positioning, creatively utilizing the tools given to you each match, and having a deep understanding of the mechanics, not just because you have something unlocked. The reason I'm making this point is because to some degree, I feel like Zombies has lost this a little bit in recent years. In BO3, you had the addition of weapon kits and gobblegum. Black Ops 4 was practically menu progression the video game, and Cold War also had out-of-game progression with its weapon kits, systems, and Ethereum upgrade tree. Now again, I understand the point of these systems, and I think some do it better than others, but my ultimate point is Zombies specifically thrives on a very minimal out-of-game progression system, and the majority of the player's meaningful movement forward is always within the game itself. There is room for a reasonable amount of it, perhaps like Black Ops 3, but it has to be very subtle. Once again, this is just personal taste, but I would at least think there's a few people out there that agree or relate to what I'm saying. Now, it's time to talk about the maps in Cold War. This was one of the easiest ways to point out where opportunities were missed, but also why Treyarch seems to have found their footing as the season went on. Let's start with the on-disc map, Maschine. While I think there are certainly better on-disc maps when compared to this one, I actually think Maschine is a near-perfect introductory map to the game and its systems. Straight from spawning in, you are in the backyard of a familiar zombies location, albeit a totally different tone. You go through the familiar area as you progress through the map, but most of the time, you barely even register it as Nocturne Toten itself. It's so subtle and expertly done, and it doesn't come off as fan service, but you get the feeling of coming home in a sense. So your first impression of the game isn't completely foreign or shocking. The map guides you along the underground facility in which you power the station, explore the Dark Ether, and unlock Pack-a-Punch. This was a refreshing step back from the overcomplicated Pack-a-Punch processes of the past. You get a sense of what's going on, and you're introduced to the concept of the Dark Ether. The map flow is also very expertly connected via tunnels that can be used in the Dark Ether. No area of the map is too hard to get to from another point very quickly. In my opinion, the Dark Ether concept is one of the most criminally underused elements of the game. Just in Cold War generally, there's so many neat ideas you could pull from of flipping back and forth from the dimension, but it doesn't take the full leap it needed to get there in my eyes. The main quest involves building 4 wonder weapons, using the Dark Ether to do so, encounter all the boss enemies, travel back in time to watch events unfold, and get a grip for what took place at Project End Station. The ray gun is actually the best gun in the map again, as the wonder weapons, the die shockwaves, don't overshadow it anymore. The quest design is very straightforward, and there's virtually no random spawn locations for anything you need to gather. All items can be found reliably in the same place every time. There are perk machines that are familiar to what you know, with a hint of novelty to each one. Pack-a-Punch is the same, but a little different as well. And there's a great blend of order and chaos to the map, novelty and familiarity. Maschine also has plenty of open-spaced terrain. There are tight corridors for a more fast-paced style of game, and the map structure, more generally speaking, is extremely well thought out. However, there are a few things in which it sort of misses the mark on. Main quests aside, there are hardly any meaningful side Easter eggs to discover. While there are a few good ones like the Coffin Dance or the Ether Tool Monster Door, a lot of people feel in this aspect Cold War doesn't even hold a candle to previous games, and I agree with this to some extent. Games like BO3 and 4 had obscure side Easter eggs that wouldn't be discovered sometimes until literal years later. In Cold War maps, all of the side quests get found within a few days, and there's virtually no mystery or mystique left to the maps very much. Now, this is where an important distinction is to be drawn. I'm okay with side Easter eggs that aren't required to experience the main course of the map to be very arbitrary and hard to solve. The main quest, for the most part, should be a replicable experience, but in this regard, we could have our cake and eat it too, with the main quest format being more gameplay oriented and the side quests being a little bit more like those arbitrary Easter eggs of the past. Whether the lack of side quests had to do with budget or time reasons, I don't really know, but Maschine fairly gets criticized a lot for this. Another big problem I have with Die Maschine is the boss fight. Now, originally, I was quite happy with the mix-up of the formula. I was starting to get tired of the 3-phase shoot the big guy style of boss fight, and in this one, there's really no boss at all. You just protect a guy while he does the thing, and honestly, I was okay with that as a concept. It was a pretty neat switch-up, but my main problem with this fight is that Orlov cannot die or be hurt, and there's literally almost no reason to try your hardest when protecting him, because given how efficiently you play, will determine how fast he gets done with his tasks, but otherwise there's no real hurry or stakes. But I get why they did this. As an introductory map, they may have reasoned that it would be too hard for the average player if Orlov had a health bar that could be taken down. Interestingly, the health bar still appears to this day, but it doesn't really go anywhere. I always thought you could improve this boss fight tremendously by having it to where Orlov can take damage and possibly could die if you don't defend him well enough. This would add the stakes it needs for it to actually be interesting and may not be too difficult for the average player. But they probably figured most COD fans who play the map on disc and they'll never touch zombies again if they don't like it, so they want the initial experience to be good for them. You really have to make a solid first impression. The boss fight can't be too oppressive in the first map, but this will change later on though. The map isn't too intimidating for brand new players, and yet it can be played in a way that's satisfying for more skilled and veteran players who are looking for somewhat of a challenge. Die Maschine accomplished what it needed to do as an on-disc map. Get the player comfortable with the mechanics and the story and build from there. By no means is Die Maschine a masterpiece compared to the greats of the past, but it is a very competent map that did what it needed to do. And it's a map that I still find myself personally gravitating towards when playing Cold War Zombies even to this day. Firebase Z was the second map we got for Cold War Zombies in the round-based experiences and was actually released half a season earlier than it was originally scheduled for. This map follows directly after the events of Die Maschine and is primarily focused on retrieving Samantha Max's back from the Dark Ether narratively. The structure of the map is set in a Vietnam village for the starting area, within it a teleporter to take you to an Omega facility in the jungle. The map's progression is fairly similar to Die Maschine, needing to turn on 3 generators around the map, which in turn give you access to Pack-a-Punch and also perks, simultaneously giving the player a detailed tour of the map. The layout is similar to a lot of Zombies maps, having one central hub area with 3 or 4 deviating areas which all have their own purpose. The map is also fairly open in terms of space. It does not see the original ray gun return to the map. Instead, this is replaced with the new Ray K rifle. This is acquired via a small Easter egg quest or from the mystery box or even the trials the player can do. The Ray K is a clear departure from the 4 elemental wonder weapon formula we've seen in a lot of Zombies maps beforehand, but it's able to still be interesting on its own as a weapon due to its 2 separate fire mechanics and how they interact. However, Firebase Z's main Easter egg is somewhat less impressive than Die Machine's. Many of the steps require a lot of running back and forth to listen to either Ravenov or Dr. Peck as they dump exposition on you for most of the quest without too much substance to the steps. There is a part in which you need to collect the correct launch codes from mimics by getting them down to low health and trapping them with an essence collector, via Pokemon pretty much. On paper, this is fine. In execution, it's one of the worst Easter egg steps in the entire game. The correct mimic you will need will come from an item that you can physically see spawn, but the special mimics you need have absolutely no visual indicator that they are different from the others, which can spawn in naturally as the round progresses, and they get mixed up quite easily. The step is still also incredibly buggy at times, and in general, one of the weakest Easter egg steps in all of Cold War Zombies. Apart from that, the main Easter egg involves you getting 3 ether canisters to power reactors. The way to obtain these are fairly fun, however. One requires you to play a Spot the Difference, which is very enjoyable to do. The second one is a mini holdout location inside of a yellow bubble as you get swarmed by zombies and hellhounds for about 1 to 2 minutes. These steps are probably the best in the entire quest line, and at least for me, definitely stick out as one of the more memorable moments in at least this map or in greater Cold War Zombies. Firebase Z also opts to replace traditional dog rounds with a formula called assault waves. This was a very welcome change that fit the map thematically and even on a deeper gameplay level. You must defend the post from hordes of zombies that pour out of 3 different portals in front of you. Also, whenever doing an assault wave beyond around 30 rarity, you must also fight an Orda in addition to the zombies. This was an idea I hope we see expanded upon in the future. It's an extremely interesting concept, and I don't think we've even seen as far as it can go. It's certainly a good replacement for dog rounds that maybe don't fit the map thematically or otherwise. The general aesthetic of the map is also something I love. The deep jungle with the backdrop and the juxtaposition of the purple dark ether wall is extremely pleasing to the eye. The boss fight and the lack of meaningful side Easter eggs, however, is where Firebase Z starts to fall apart a little bit for me. All of the side Easter eggs could be described as lackluster at best and absolutely tedious at worst. The boss fight is introduced as yet another Orda that we've already fought in the assault waves. The boss fight itself is stationary and fairly static. It just accumulates damage while throwing out attacks until you kill it. It can also be completely cheesed depending on what loadouts and field upgrade combinations you use, and that's literally it. It's pretty underwhelming for a boss fight, and it's very forgettable in comparison to some of the other fights you might choose to play. Another thing that Firebase Z struggles with very much is tone. Not in terms of color palette or anything, but it's never clear how you should feel when doing certain steps or even beating the map. In Black Ops 4 Blood of the Dead, the entire tone of the map is somber. Even from the get-go, you know something unfortunate is going to take place. The dark twinge in the round change sound and the general uneasiness of the characters, there's this atmosphere of hopelessness that fills the air in that map. And I give BO4 a lot of grief for its gameplay, but its tone with all of the maps were very clear and well presented. Even in 9, when you beat the Easter egg and the Chaos Crew finds themselves awaiting execution, you think to yourself, surely something's going to rescue them, only to see them be actually executed in front of your very eyes. It's shocking, and that's how it's supposed to make you feel. It's very intentional. At the end of this Easter egg, we're not sure how to feel at all. Should we feel excited that Samantha is saved? Should we feel sympathy for the trauma that she went through? Should we be thankful to Ravenov and grateful for his assistance? Are we supposed to feel a sense of relief that we escaped? We literally don't know. Everything happens so fast that you just don't even have time to think about it, really. Overall, I think Firebase Z missed an opportunity to step up on the ideas presented by Maschine and take some chances with something risky. Treyarch didn't take much risk with Firebase Z, but they were going to take a risk with their next edition, however. Outbreak would be the surprise and unexpected new addition to Cold War Zombies. This came directly after Firebase Z, being a zombies experience that wasn't exactly a round-based map. Outbreak's gameplay design is fundamentally taking the fun elements of zombies and putting them into a blender on a large-scale experience. In my opinion, this mode is the most underappreciated gem of the entire game. The basic structure involves you going around a large world, which is, in most cases, a fireteam map from MP recontextualized for zombies. You have the opportunity to explore the area, to gather resources, points, scrap, fight enemies in small side world events, doing other tasks like opening sealed crates and fighting for loot in order to upgrade your own loadout to increase the power you have in response to the difficulty spiking with each new teleport. Teleporting can also be only done after completing the main objective on each map. These objectives can range from timed holdouts to escort and protect locations. The quests and areas vary so much, you will never have the same experience playing Outbreak anytime you play it. The juxtaposition as well of having the two modes of round-based zombies and Outbreak in the same game is absolutely genius. The former allows you to play a tightly crafted experience the developers meticulously made that can work incredibly well, as we've seen over the past decade of zombies maps. Outbreak, however, allows for the player to sort of tell their own story. That's why it's so open-ended. Now, we will come back to the secret genius behind Outbreak in a moment, but first let's take apart a bit more in detail some of the great attributes and also some of the major flaws in this mode. Starting with the good, Outbreak features a very dynamic set of gameplay challenges that get genuinely difficult the higher you go into the rounds. It condenses some of the best elements of zombies from round-based maps and gives it to you in a variety of ways. Examples, the holdout objective, are just a few minutes of that classic holdout-style Nocturne Toten claustrophobic gameplay, very primitive in the best way possible. HVT is essentially hunting down a big boss enemy, which is sort of like a small-scale Easter egg boss fight in a way. side quests with defending objectives from zombies, and so on. Nearly everything that's fun about the raw gameplay of zombies, whether from Cold War or other experiences, can all be played in a random fashion that keeps the player guessing what's next in a curious way. It also has technically two main Easter egg quests that one of them house quite literally the best boss fight in all of Cold War so far. The Legion fight is so extremely well designed. While at its core it is a 3-sequence shoot the guy boss fight, it does it in a way that's actually challenging and interesting. It also adds a ticking clock element that forces you to be efficient and work well with your team, otherwise you will lose after a given time frame. This is one of Treyarch's strongest boss fights in general, not just Cold War. While the steps to get to this fight are not incredibly complicated or even terribly fun to do, it's worth doing to take on Legion. Not so much the second Easter egg boss fight, this one admittedly is much weaker, but I can see what could have been with this one. Another anecdotal reason for me, and admittedly completely biased, is the fact that Outbreak is so easy and enjoyable to watch. There are these natural down periods that are under your control that make the action more exciting when it is happening. This is also the beauty, I would argue, for most Battle Royale games as well. The slower periods punctuated by intense action are incredibly satisfying, and as a viewer, you can follow the narrative of the game from the get-go. You know exactly what round it is, you know what objective is up, and you can tell how they're progressing through the match with their loadouts as the match goes on. One final good thing to note with Outbreak as a whole, you can genuinely tell Treyarch poured their passion into this mode. It has the feel of custom zombies in the best possible sense. They try to utilize nearly everything at their disposal to make one absolutely crazy over-the-top zombies experience, and for the first draft of this idea, I would say they did a damn good job. Technically, you can make the argument that the Tortured Path from World War II zombies was actually the first draft of this mode, which utterly failed for a variety of reasons I won't get into in this video, but suffice to say, this was a confident step forward in the right direction. With that said, I do have some issues with Outbreak. Firstly, and the most obvious one that everybody will point out, the maps themselves are just reused fireteam maps and assets that lack the personality of a zombie's atmosphere. Now, I agree with the sentiment for the most part, however, I would like to point out that reused MP/campaign assets repurposed in a creative way is quite literally where zombies came from originally. In fact, it's precisely how Nocturne Toten was made. There hasn't been a single zombies map in history that didn't borrow assets from other portions of the game. Some are more blatant than others. That said, I completely understand where people are coming from, where they say each map is basically more or less the same sandbox with very few differences in tone or atmosphere. Also, this means the maps are huge, yes, but most of it ends up being dead space anyways. You have your few key areas where all the objectives take place and all the side quests go, but apart from that, there's so much space that just exists that you'll never interact with at all. Also, there's a certain point in the game past round 10 to 15 where after those, progression is completely over. Most people are never playing past round 5 to 7 on Outbreak on average anyways, but those who want to push for high rounds will cap out at a certain point progress-wise. You have all of the loadout weapons, pack-a-punch, perks, and wonder weapons you could ever want, and you just end up repeating the same objectives again and again. I've always thought a partly solution to this would be to have exclusive weapons or items that can only be obtained after rounds 10 to 15. Even if it's not too much or anything crazy, it still gives the player a little something to keep striving for. Or have a region or maybe a boss fight that's hard locked behind a certain round counter. There's an unfortunate lack of side Easter eggs as well in this mode. Besides the world events, there's virtually nothing else you can even do in the map besides the main objective. And I'm not saying it needs as many side Easter eggs in each region as a traditional round-based map, but it would be nice to have things to potentially discover in all of the dead zones. I think the second draft of this mode can be improved greatly with a few additions. Number 1, more concepts like the Legion boss fight and expand on that further, almost in like a Destiny style kind of raid. Number 2, make the maps have a bit more of a zombies atmosphere and feeling. This includes side quests and other things to discover, ciphers, radios, etc. Number 3, keep only the most fun objectives and double down on them. As much as I like the objectives generally, I'll admit there's a big difference in fun between doing a holdout objective on a high round and something like escort or transport missions. And finally, number 4, extend the progression far into high rounds. Interesting, it looks like the Vanguard Zombies Der Anfang is doing just that, but that's a discussion for another time. Looking at it further away now, I think Outbreak was one of the healthiest things for the community. It provided something meaningfully different to round-based maps while still being released alongside that more traditional experience. I only hope Treyarch's next Zombies game, they double down on the fun, and the second draft of Outbreak is the one that we were all waiting for. We waited a decent amount of time between the release of Outbreak and the next round-based map during this season of Zombies. Outbreak, while it was released in Season 2, whereas Maschine or Toten didn't release until Season 4 Reloaded. It's safe to say the community was very anxious for another round-based map, and did the wait pay off? Well, let's take that apart a little bit. Maschine or Toten is set in Berlin and functionally has the atmosphere of a Black Ops 1 map. Even the round change music in the early game is an indicator of that. The basic setup of this map is a neat little inversion where Omega, who are at this point the main antagonists of the story, have the upper hand as they've captured us to do their bidding and stop Valentina from opening a portal releasing the zombies from the dark ether. The initial setup in Maschine or Toten is so well done in comparison to Firebase Z, you have significantly more options and obstacles in your way to turn on power and pack-a-punch. And the whole process feels more eventful as well. You see a ritualistic summoning circle around the Maschine and you have to fight for it, as opposed to Firebase Z where you just walk up and it turns on with no real fanfare. Maschine or Toten also introduces us to Klaus, a sassy metal robot who assists us throughout the majority of the main Easter egg quest. Klaus added some much needed flair to this map in my opinion. It's one of those iconic things that define a map in some way, such as PhD and Ascension, the dual-wield marshals and Zetsubo no Shima, and of course the staves on Origins. The steps involve you utilizing Klaus to explore new areas of the map, access rooms previously unavailable, and even stop a whole train at one point. Above all else, I would make the argument that the steps in Maschine or Toten are just plain fun. Even the puzzle stuff, getting the codes with the black light to input them on the safe, which in turn gives you access to the map's new wonder weapon, all work in service to the map's ultimate goal and tone. Speaking of which, the Cerberus is the map's new exclusive wonder weapon, which is essentially just a 1980s concept laser pistol with a variety of unique attachments that change its function. Now, differently to other maps, these are acquired simply by killing zombies. No side quests are required. Maschine or Toten also shines because it doesn't use the 4 wonder weapon formula for a bulk of its Easter egg like Die Maschine, Origins, or even Der Eisendrache. It has completely separate steps that are enjoyable despite using the wonder weapon or not. It's not too oppressive of an Easter egg, yet it feels rewarding to do at the same time. Also, Maschine or Toten had a clear step up in direction and quality of its side Easter eggs. For example, the bunny Easter egg now takes you to a completely new playable area inside a club that gives you access to a prize door after completing 3 separate waves, and it can be re-accessed every 15 rounds. Also, sniping moving targets in a step very similar to Buried's sharpshooter step now awards you with an ether tool for free, which increases the rarity level of your gun. The layout of this map is also surprisingly fluid considering this has 3 separate layers of verticality to it. This is thanks to smart placement of buildings and drop-off points and zip lines. Maschine or Toten has also one of the stronger boss fights in the game as well, in my opinion. While not quite as good as Legion, this one has multifaceted mechanics and 5 separate stages that give you an opportunity to fight the boss at almost every location in the map. She has an overshield that you must break in order to deal any damage whatsoever. She can fire projectile shards, she can heal herself by summoning a circle of zombies, and even has an instant wipe mechanic very similar to the one from Der Eisendrache or some other fights. One criticism I have, however, is the fight doesn't really change all that much as you go throughout the sequences. In my eyes, the fight would have been better if she gained a new ability or attack with each new phase. This would keep you on your toes as a player, and you would certainly feel the increase in difficulty as you scale up, giving you a feeling that you earned that victory, assuming you complete it. While I have my problems with it, as a whole, it's a lot of fun, and it's an engaging boss fight. With Legion and Valentina, this seems to be where Treyarch appeared to find their footing a little bit with boss fights. This was clearly a map that much time went into, and for the most part, the community agrees it's one of, if not the best map in Cold War. Maschine or Toten probably struck the best balance of having a solid map layout, enjoyable wonder weapon systems, fun main and side Easter eggs, alongside a pretty good atmosphere. Overall, I don't have much bad things to say about this map, and most of my problems with it are pretty minor and not even really worth talking about, so I'll leave it there. Maschine or Toten is an excellent zombies map.
Strike team, Zykov is mission priority 1. Get to him before Omega.
For Cold War Zombies, the final round-based map released in Season 6, and in the meantime of all of these maps coming out, Outbreak continued to receive support and evolve as a game mode over time alongside these releases. But the final round-based map takes us to the place in the facility where the red light, green light mission from Cold War's campaign takes place. This map is called Forsaken. It's a Russian training facility simulated to be an American town, and in this map we see an ethereal storm break out overhead as we quickly find out Zykov, a man we've been trying to rescue from the Dark Ether, was actually the Forsaken the whole time and was led into our world, and we now have to stop him. Forsaken right off the bat opens up very differently to the rest of Cold War maps. It plays much faster pace, and the gameplay essentially behaves like No Man's Land from Moon. This effectively cuts out much of the boring early game in Cold War Zombies, which has always been one of the weakest elements of the mode. Also, Treyarch fine-tuned the difficulty on this map to be more appropriate to fit the current power climb in Cold War. Round 15 on Forsaken feels much harder than 15 on any other map, and it also brings a lot of separate attributes to the table that really separate this map from the others. Now, let's start with what's good about Forsaken. Firstly, it has a very straightforward pack-punch setup that takes you to a safe room. You're in an observation tower in which crystals that emit radiation will force you to leave eventually. Otherwise, you'll start to take damage. No zombies spawn in here, giving you free access to Pack-a-Punch, start trials, or otherwise start the main Easter egg. It's also chock full of mid-game cutscenes and interesting locations to fight in. The Amplifier Room, the office, and the manufactured town stores all feel distinctly different to one another, providing a good visual variety. Also, Forsaken has by far the best side Easter eggs in any Cold War Zombies map, hands down. The free Perkaholic Easter egg with the TVs, the pizza delivery with Ronald Reagan after you've accessed the secret Hell's Kitchen room, the genuinely difficult Bubby lockdown step, playing Nocturne Toten in the arcade at the World at War Maschine, the Dreisendrach Dragons pinball game, and so on. This is a clear indication that Treyarch really got into a groove with these side Easter eggs. They're all very creative and well thought out. In fact, Forsaken has some of the better side Easter eggs that I've seen in Zombies as a whole, not just Cold War. The new Pack-a-Punch cam on this map is absolutely gorgeous as well. The boss fight is very good, probably on par with the Valentina boss fight, but not quite as good as Legion still. The map introduces us to a brand new two-part wonder weapon, the Chrysalax. This has a melee form that is ridiculously strong and restores your HP as you swing it, then can be transformed into a mini SMG that fires smaller projectile Ethereum crystals. I'm a fan of this wonder weapon for the most part and has interesting uses. It's great in Forsaken's boss fight, which again plays extraordinarily well. Now, I can't say the same for most of the main Easter egg, but we'll get to that shortly. Fighting off the Forsaken in the finale in like a big phony manufactured town while you have a multi-staged and mechanically interesting boss fight was a really good way to end the experience. The map itself is also just so visually interesting no matter where you are, and it definitely felt like a DLC 4 map, if that makes any sense at all. However, not everything is good in Forsaken. For starters, the map layout is one of the worst designs since possibly Moon or Die Rise. There are two main sections of town that are on opposite ends to one another, but visually look almost identical, and it took me way longer than normal to get a feel for this layout compared to what I'm used to. More importantly, the flow between all these areas are so amazingly awkward, I find myself idly running around the map with a ton of wasted time attempting to get where I need to be. There are a ton of random shops that have literally no purpose at all. I compare this to any other round-based map in Cold War, and this easily takes the cake for the most amount of wasted and dead space. It's so bizarre. It's difficult to articulate properly how strange the layout and flow are on this map, and it's something best experienced for yourself. Additionally, the main Easter egg is very lackluster compared to Mauer der Toten. You push one button, do a lockdown, shoot some purple orbs, throw a rock at a thing, kill the thing that ate the rock, drive a car into a thing, and build a device. It's very basic, and it feels like most of the dev time was spent on side Easter eggs rather than the main one, and possibly fair enough, that may have been the right call, but it just felt like this was the least substantial Easter egg main quest on a map that could have actually had the one with the most intricacy. It's the prime example of wasted opportunity. Personally, I don't think this map is objectively as good as Mauer der Toten. That said, however, I really enjoy the stronger elements of this map more, perhaps even better than Mauer der Toten. Also, I haven't really talked about cutscenes much as they're not really important to the map and its core gameplay loop, but Forsaken literally has the ending we all wanted for Revelations, a 6-minute long CG animated cutscene that gives both a satisfying conclusion to this game, some big reveals, and even prodded some intrigue for where the story is headed in the future. Forsaken is by no means one of the greatest zombies maps of all time, but it honestly feels like the appropriate ending to this game in particular. I didn't try to be too big or over the top exactly. It was a neat little concept and a story in itself executed fairly well. So, with pretty much all the main maps and modes covered in Cold War, besides things like Onslaught, which is a great mode in and of itself, I just want to give a few closing thoughts. Cold War Zombies for me was able to bring back the spirit of the game we fell in love with years ago back to the forefront to some degree. They didn't bank completely on nostalgia and try their hardest to be liked by the community. None of the maps were remakes at all, and Outbreak was a pleasantly surprising good game mode. It wasn't the perfect game, as none are, but it was the one we needed given the circumstances. I'm very hopeful that Treyarch can take the lessons they learned from Cold War, both good and bad, to positively influence their future projects. Hopefully the team will be more confident and move in stride with each release. They managed to make zombies relevant and again where new games are seemingly dime a dozen. I think this was the best possible outcome for what could have been a disastrous year for video game development, and for that I'll give them a lot of respect. And to speak more personally for a moment, this game made me fall in love with zombies after a period where I had given up on the game entirely. It revitalized my spirit for this game and gave me a newfound sense of passion for creating content as a result. So if you're still watching at this point in the video, I appreciate you beyond what you can know. I honestly can't deny a lot of my love for this game is also partly a result of all the support that you guys have shown on the content this year, and for that I truly am humbled. I tried to analyze this game from the most fair and unbiased sense of the word, even though I'm never going to be free from my own personal bias. I tried to take a look at exactly what's good and what's bad, criticize its flaws, and to praise its strengths. And for that, I hope you guys did find it enjoyable, or at the very least found it interesting or entertaining. And if you have any feedback that you would like to let me know, please let me know in the comments. But aside from that, thank you guys for watching. If you really made it this far in the video, you are a legend. Have a great day, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take it easy, everybody, and peace out.